The air inside the federal courthouse in downtown Boston felt thick and motionless, like a humid summer evening that never quite lets you breathe. I could feel 100 pairs of eyes on my back, some curious, some judgmental, most of them belonging to people who thought they already knew the end of my story. From the gallery, I watched as the prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Grace Henderson, rose from her seat. There was something so efficient about her movements, the way she straightened her jacket, the way she paused just long enough to make everyone in the room hold their breath. You could tell she was used to command. She looked over at the judge, her voice clean and sharp. "The prosecution calls one last witness, Your Honor." She waited a beat, just enough for my family's row to start whispering, and then she announced, "A Captain Jessica Brooks, United States Army." My name, no, my new name, with the title nobody in my family had ever spoken aloud, seemed to echo off the marble walls. For a second, the only thing I could hear was the shuffle of paper and the click of a pen. Then the murmurs started, little tremors of confusion and gossip running down the gallery like a wave. But I didn't hear them. My attention was locked on just one person, my Uncle Frank, who sat at the defense table, his once smug face slack with shock. The same man who, for decades, had been the undisputed patriarch of the Miller family, the man who'd built his self-image on being untouchable, now looked like someone who'd seen a ghost. And in a way, he had. Just 2 hours before, he'd been as arrogant as ever, holding court in the echoing marble hallway outside, surrounded by our extended family. His trial for wire fraud had brought us all here, a spectacle of unity, at least for the cameras. He moved among them with a swagger, projecting an air of invincibility. My mom, Linda, wrung her hands beside him, her face tight with forced composure. Me. I stood a little apart, close enough to be seen but not included. That was my role, the family's footnote, the odd one out. I wore it like a second skin. It had always been this way. In family photos, I was the one half out of frame. In conversations, the one whose stories trailed off unfinished, buried under louder voices. My mother's love was a kind of apology for my existence. A Jess, honey, could you go fetch your uncle some water? It must be boring for you to just stand around. Not a suggestion, a gentle command, soft as silk, cold as ice. Her reminder that my place was to be helpful, invisible, never in the way. Frank overheard and barked a laugh that ricocheted off the polished stone. "Don't bother her, Lynn," he called out. What would a college dropout know about federal courtrooms, anyway? Probably thinks it's all like one of her reality shows. There was a ripple of laughter, the kind that stings most because it's so casual, so rehearsed. That kind of jab was nothing new. I'd kept a running tally in my head since I was old enough to recognize pity in an adult's eyes. But this time, something was different, because this time, as Frank spoke, the prosecutor herself walked past. Grace Henderson didn't flinch, didn't break stride, but her eyes flicked to mine for just a split second. In that look, the old wound became something else entirely. It was no longer just family humiliation. It was tactical. It was evidence. Frank kept laughing, confident that I was still the family failure, here only for appearances, as if my real life didn't exist. He had no clue he'd just humiliated me in front of the very person whose case depended on the evidence my unit had risked everything to secure. That's the thing about living two lives. You become an expert at pretending they don't intersect. In one world, you're essential, trusted, part of something bigger than yourself. In the other, you were tolerated, a convenient shadow. I felt it acutely that morning, how I could be both things at once. To truly understand what happened next, you'd have to know Thanksgiving at the Millers in suburban Chicago. The house was bright with laughter, the air thick with the scent of turkey and burnt coffee. Uncle Frank at the head of the table, booming about real estate deals and political insider gossip. His pride and joy, my cousin Adam, sat beside him, already a junior partner at Frank's company before he'd ever faced a real setback. That dinner, after the toast, Frank clinked his glass. "I've got an announcement," he boomed. "As of Monday, Adam is the newest junior partner at Miller & Co." The room erupted in applause. My mother teared up. I watched Adam bask in the spotlight for a promotion we all knew was a family favor, not a victory. In my head, another checkmark went in the mental ledger. Adam's every easy win celebrated, my own hard-won successes met with silence. I waited for a lull in the conversation and then tried, just once more. "I actually have some news, too," I said, voice wavering a little. "I finished my advanced field training with." Frank cut me off with a patronizing smile. "Another little certificate for the wall?" He cooed. "That's very nice, Jess." He patted my shoulder with the same hand he'd just used to raise a toast to Adam. And just like that, the entire room pivoted away, back to Adam, back to their real achievements. I shrank inside myself, the courage I'd mustered folding away into the silent pocket where I kept all my disappointments. But outside that world, in my other life, the one my family never asked about, I was someone else entirely. That other life, the one my family never saw, didn't have space for apologies or invisibility. My real work happened in a world of humming fluorescent lights and electronic blueprints. My days were spent at Fort Benning, far from the Miller family's brick home in Illinois, surrounded by people who judged me by actions, not by stories from my past. I remember standing in the Army's Tactical Operations Center a few weeks after that Thanksgiving, briefing a joint task force made up of seasoned military police and federal agents. The screens glowed with live surveillance feeds and detailed floor plans of our target's compound. There, at the front of the room, it was my job to give orders, not fetch drinks or fade into the background. "The fugitive is in a reinforced structure," I said, pointer steady on the map. "Alpha Squad will breach from the north. Our comms are fully encrypted. Stick to protocol and expect resistance." I scanned the room, making eye contact with each squad leader, reading the tension and determination in their faces. No one interrupted. No one laughed off my words or patted me on the shoulder as if I was playing at something important. There was only the mission and the expectation of competence. When I finished, Major Cooper, my commanding officer, a man with lines on his face deepened by years of hard field work, nodded once. "Solid plan, Brooks. Go execute." That small moment, that brief flash of respect, was worth more to me than every holiday dinner with my family combined. In this world, I mattered because I'd earned it. Back in Boston, with the trial reaching its climax, those two realities, the soldier and the invisible niece, collided. My mother called late one night, her voice trembling through the static. "Honey, I know your uncle is difficult. He's just under so much stress. This trial is tearing him up inside. He doesn't mean what he says." I listened, letting her string together the same old excuses, each one a well-worn thread in our family's tattered tapestry. "Please, Jess, be the bigger person," as she whispered. The words sat heavy in my chest, familiar and suffocating. For years, being the bigger person had meant shrinking myself down, folding away my ambition, my anger, my truth. But something had changed. Maybe it was all the years of being overlooked. Maybe it was that one look from Prosecutor Henderson, that fleeting moment of recognition that cut through the noise of my family's disappointment. Whatever it was, the old patterns finally broke. This was no longer a family feud. This was a matter of integrity and lore. Uncle Frank's arrogance wasn't just a personal insult, it was a professional liability. I was the only one who saw both sides, who knew exactly how his ego had led him to make mistakes, the kind that left paper trails. I took a step I never imagined I would. Requesting a private meeting with Henderson. I walked into her office, not as a Jess the dropout or the disappointing niece, but as Captain Brooks, officer of the United States Army, bearer of sensitive intelligence. There's something your team should know, I began, keeping my tone measured. Frank Miller, the defendant, he believes he's untouchable. He has a network of shell companies, but he also has one weakness. His pride. He keeps private ledgers at home, not just numbers but his own handwritten diaries about every deal he's ever pulled. He hides them in a wall safe behind the painting in his home office. The make is a Canon 8020, the kind you can't buy at Home Depot. I know exactly where it is. I laid out everything, the location, the code, even which painting to look behind. This wasn't family gossip. This was actionable intelligence. Henderson listened without interruption, her eyes sharp. She didn't offer comfort or sympathy, she offered professional respect. A warrant for that safe, as she said, it could change everything. Thank you, Captain. A separate federal team handled the raid, careful to avoid any appearance of family bias. They found exactly what I'd said they would: meticulous ledgers, every fraudulent transfer, every secret deal. The kind of evidence that turned defense teams pale. Suddenly, my role shifted. I was no longer the background character. I was the expert witness, the person who could authenticate the chain of custody for the very evidence that might bring down the Miller family's so-called legacy. On the morning of my testimony, my family still thought this was just another chapter in our private drama, a little turbulence before Uncle Frank's inevitable escape. They were wrong. When I entered the courtroom, everything felt suspended. The defense had finished their case, the jury's nerves frayed. Uncle Frank lounged in his chair, giving his legal team confident nods, flashing my mother a smile as if victory was already his. But the air was changing. I could feel it, a quiet vibration under the surface, like the moment before a thunderstorm. They had no idea what was about to happen. Everything in the courtroom slowed down, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. When Assistant U.S. Attorney Henderson stood up, she didn't need to bang her fist or raise her voice. Her mere presence quieted the room. "Your Honor," she said, as the prosecution calls one final rebuttal witness. The words drifted over the oak benches and settled on my family, confusion blooming across their faces. Uncle Frank's smile twitched. His lawyer looked over, exasperated. Henderson continued, "This witness will testify to the provenance of the evidence presented in Exhibit 17, the defendant's private ledgers." For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then Henderson turned toward the gallery, eyes resting on me. The prosecution summons Captain Jessica Brooks to the stand. A ripple ran through the Miller family's row. "Jess, what's happening?" and my mother whispered, voice rising in panic. My cousin Adam leaned in. "She's not. She can't be a witness." Someone else muttered, "Isn't she just the dropout?" They were scrambling to fit this moment into the narrative they'd always known, the one where I was the family's gentle failure, always present but never important. But the pieces didn't fit, and I could see panic setting in. The bailiff called my name, voice booming. I stood. Every head in the courtroom turned. It felt, for a second, as if I were wading through water, slow, heavy, inevitable. I walked past my family, past the years of being overlooked, past the weight of every family dinner where I was invisible. My heart beat steady, my back straight, every step deliberate. I let my eyes move over my family, their faces frozen in shock. But I didn't stop. I didn't smile. I felt nothing but calm, the peace of someone who has already let go. At the witness stand, I slipped off my blazer and laid it on the chair, exposing my military insignia and my army badge for all to see. There was an audible gasp, the collective intake of breath from people who had never seen me as anything more than a supporting character. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Adam stared, jaw slack. The judge glanced at me with recognition and respect. "Captain Brooks, thank you for being here." I was sworn in, hands steady on the Bible. The gravity of the moment felt both real and surreal, as if I'd stepped out of one life and into another. My testimony was not emotional. I didn't talk about years of being dismissed or the small heartbreaks that add up over time. I spoke the language of law and procedure, of reasonable suspicion and search warrants, of the chain of custody for evidence, of precise dates, times, and digital logs. I described the protocol my unit followed, the way evidence had been collected, transferred, secured. My voice was level, cold, professional. I saw the change in Frank's face, the gradual collapse of certainty, the dawning horror. He'd always defined me by what I hadn't accomplished, a diploma I'd never earned, a family role I'd never fit. But now, under the harsh light of the court, it was my expertise that was undoing him. I glanced, just for a moment, at my mother. She sat rigid, face pale and empty. Adam looked lost, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. Their dynasty, built on pride, denial, and willful blindness, was crumbling in real time. As the jury listened, the words of guilty landed one by one, each count another fracture in the Miller myth. I didn't feel triumph, only a strange, distant pity. The judge adjourned, people rose and began to file out, but my family sat frozen. They didn't look at me. They didn't seem to see anyone. Maybe for the first time in their lives, they were forced to face the truth. That's when Assistant U.S. Attorney Henderson and Major Cooper approached me at the edge of the gallery. Henderson shook my hand, grip firm, her gratitude strictly professional. "Couldn't have done it without you, Captain Brooks," as she said. Major Cooper just nodded, offering a rare, small smile. "Good work." I nodded back and turned away from the place where I had once tried so hard to belong. I walked out of the courtroom into the bright Boston sunlight, not as the family's forgotten daughter, but as myself, a soldier, an officer, a woman whose value was measured not by old stories, but by what she had chosen to become. The courthouse doors closed behind me, and with each step down those granite stairs, it felt like I was shedding an old skin. The city outside was alive, horns honking, people shouting into phones, the summer breeze smelling faintly of salt and roasted coffee from the cafe on the corner. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. My Army assignment took me back to Washington, D.C., where I became team lead for a new joint task force specializing in interstate fugitives and high-risk recoveries. My office bore a shiny new plaque. Captain Jessica Brooks, Task Force Lead. There were days I'd walk into the conference room for our morning briefing and just pause at the door, taking it in. The faces of my squad, the glint of sunlight on polished tables, the way people fell silent, ready to listen. My team was a mix of Army, Federal Marshals, and even a couple of former NYPD officers. I knew every one of their stories: whose kid had made varsity basketball, who was struggling with PTSD, who made the best chili on night ops. Here, my authority was earned. Not once did someone roll their eyes when I spoke, or suggest I was out of my depth. If my voice shook, it was only because of adrenaline before a raid, not because someone was waiting for me to fail. And when the job was done, we celebrated together, as equals, as a family of our own making. There was something profoundly healing in that. I'd spent so long longing for acceptance from people who never really saw me, when all along I'd been building a new home among those who did. One night, after a tough multi-state operation that ended in a midnight arrest on a rainy back road in Pennsylvania, my team dragged ourselves to a dingy Irish pub near our DC hotel. The place was all dark wood and faded football pennants, but the laughter was real. We swapped stories about bad landlords and good dogs, about growing up poor or rich or somewhere in between. Someone started a pool game. I lost badly and didn't care. For the first time, I realized what I'd always been missing. This wasn't the forced closeness of my family's Thanksgiving dinners, with their polite silences and loaded conversations. This was real, connection built on shared risk and mutual respect, on the knowledge that you could count on each other in the worst moments. As the bartender set down another round, my phone vibrated with a text from my mother. I hesitated, thumb hovering, but opened it out of habit. "Jessica, your uncle was sentenced today. 10 years. I still can't understand how it came to this. I'm so sorry if we ever made you feel unimportant." I read it once. Twice. The words landed softly, without the usual sting. Once, I would have replied instantly, desperate for approval or at least acknowledgement. Now, I just stared at the screen and felt nothing. Not coldness, not triumph. Just peace. The kind that comes when you stop trying to rewrite the past. I hit archive and slipped the phone back into my jacket. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need an apology. I had finally made peace with the truth. My worth had never depended on their ability to see it. The weeks passed quickly. Our unit's successes made headlines. Promotions were whispered about. I mentored a new recruit, Sergeant Valentina Ruiz, who reminded me of myself at 22, sharp, restless, underestimated. I saw her trying to shrink herself in meetings, and after one, I caught her in the hallway. "Val," I said, "you're not here to disappear. I want you front and center at next week's briefing. No one gets to sideline you, not even you." She looked surprised, then grateful. Later, she sent me a note. "Thank you for seeing me." It meant more than she could know. Because that's all I had ever wanted, someone to see me for who I was, not for what I wasn't. One Thursday night, after a string of 12-hour days and 2 successful warrants, my team and I ended up back at that same bar. The rain pounded the windows. We ordered greasy burgers and played darts. Laughter echoed off the walls, and for the first time, I let myself be fully present. No more comparing myself to Adam. No more replaying old conversations with my mother. No more wishing things had been different. This was my life, messy, Imperfect, utterly my own. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. Late one Friday, long after the office lights had dimmed, I found myself alone in my new space. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Most nights, I stayed late to finish up incident reports or map out logistics for the next operation, but tonight was different. There was nothing urgent, no crisis buzzing on my phone, no deadline looming. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that asks you to reflect. I glanced to the wall across from my desk, where photos of my team smiled back at me. There were snapshots from the field, dirty boots, arms slung around shoulders, a cake made of MREs for someone's birthday. In the corner was a framed certificate, my advanced training from Fort Benning, the one my uncle had once mocked. Now, it meant more than any family accolade ever could. A sense of gratitude washed over me. I finally belonged somewhere, not because of shared blood, but shared experience and trust. My phone buzzed, a calendar reminder about Thanksgiving next week. I realized, with a strange sort of relief, that I wouldn't be flying home to Illinois. There would be no awkward silences around the Miller family table, no listening to Adam's latest win while my mother avoided my gaze. Instead, I'd be at the home of Sergeant Ruiz and her wife in Arlington. They'd invited the whole squad, no one left behind. I volunteered to bring dessert, even though I'm hopeless in the kitchen. Someone joked that my deployment brownies could be used as riot gear. It was the kind of ribbing that only comes from real camaraderie. A few days before the holiday, a package arrived for me at the office. Inside was a small, battered jewelry box and a letter in my mother's careful script. "Jess, I found this while cleaning out your old room. It's Grandma's locket. I hope it brings you comfort. We miss you at home. Love, Mom." For a moment, a knot formed in my throat. I remembered being a little girl, clutching that locket and listening to Grandma's stories about growing up tough in Detroit, never letting anyone tell her she couldn't do something. I wondered what she would think if she saw me now, a soldier, a leader, someone who'd carved out her own place in the world. I slipped the locket around my neck and caught my reflection in the window. Not a dropout, not a disappointment. Just Jessica Brooks, Army officer, survivor, woman who finally stood tall in her own skin. Thanksgiving at Ruiz's was raucous, filled with laughter and the clatter of mismatched plates. Someone set off the smoke alarm. We burned half the pie, but no one cared. Ruiz's toddler climbed onto my lap, sticky hands grabbing for my dog tags, and for the first time, I told the story of how I'd ended up in the army. I thought I was supposed to follow the plan, I admitted. Go to college, get the degree, make the family proud. But it turns out, you don't have to fit anyone else's blueprint. You can build your own. A chorus of a damn right went around the table. The fire in the hearth crackled, rain pelted the roof, and for a moment, I felt anchored, grounded, whole. That night, when I got home, I scrolled through old messages from my mother. There were apologies mixed with justifications, regrets tangled up in memories. I saw the patterns clearly for the first time. Her need for harmony, my uncle's need for control, my cousin's addiction to approval. I understood them, even forgave them. But I no longer let them define me. I tapped out a message. "Thanks for the locket, Mom. It means a lot. I hope you and Adam have a nice Thanksgiving." No bitterness. No need for more. I pressed a send and put my phone face down on the nightstand. I slept deeper than I had in months. The days that followed were a blur of routine and purpose. Warrant runs, debriefs, a Christmas tree someone smuggled into the office, Operation Evergreen, we called it. My team swapped Secret Santa gifts. Someone got me a mug that read and not a dropout, just a badass. I laughed until I cried. I didn't feel invisible anymore. I didn't feel less than. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Sometimes, the things that break you open your life to new light. Sometimes, family isn't who you're born to, but who stands beside you when the world gets hard. That, I finally understood, was enough. Winter crept into Washington, D.C., dressing the city in a pale chill and painting frost across the barracks windows. I fell into a new rhythm, up before dawn for a run along the Potomac, back in time for strong coffee and the familiar cadence of my team gathering for morning briefing. There was comfort in the routine, the click of boots in the hallway, the ritual of checking in on each other, the way a single glance could communicate support or a shared joke. I was no longer the girl half out of frame in family pictures. Here, I was at the center of every photo. One afternoon in mid-December, Sergeant Ruiz poked her head into my office, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Hey, Captain, you sticking around for Christmas?" I shrugged, smiling. "Looks like it. You know, first one away from family." Ruiz grinned, undeterred. "Good. You're coming to ours. No arguments." I started to protest, but she cut me off. "Don't make me pull rank." That Christmas Eve, I found myself crowded into a tiny townhouse in Alexandria, balancing a paper plate full of tamales and homemade cookies. The walls were strung with colored lights, children darted between legs, and the smell of cinnamon and cumin mixed in the air. Ruiz's family welcomed me with a warmth so easy and genuine, I barely noticed the ache of missing my own. After dinner, we exchanged stories from deployment, most of them hilarious in hindsight: missing boots, a raccoon invasion in Afghanistan, the time someone rigged the mess tent coffee pot to play a Jingle Bells at 0500. We howled with laughter, tears running down our faces. Near midnight, as everyone gathered for a family photo, Ruiz's mother pressed a mug of spiced cider into my hands. "You're always welcome here, Major," as she said softly, touching my arm. In that moment, I understood something I'd never fully believed before. You can choose your family, and sometimes they choose you right back. In the weeks that followed, my squad and I built new traditions. We organized the ugly sweater Fridays here at the office, decorated our whiteboard with terrible holiday puns, even held a Secret Santa for the neighboring Navy team. I bought matching mugs for everyone, inscribed with our call signs. The little things meant the most. One evening, I returned home after a particularly long day, 3 arrest warrants, endless paperwork, to find a small package at my door. The handwriting was unmistakable: Adams. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully, and a faded photo of the two of us as kids, grinning wildly in a backyard snowball fight. "Jess, I know we didn't always see eye to eye. I didn't always get it, why you needed to go your own way, why you didn't just do what everyone expected. But watching you in court, seeing what you've built, I get it now. You're the strongest person I know. If you ever need your big brother, I'm here. Love, Adam." I sat on the edge of my bed for a long while, staring at our childhood faces. It wasn't a grand apology, or even an admission of guilt. But it was real, and that was enough. I picked up my phone and typed out a reply. "Thanks, Adam. I'm proud of you, too. Merry Christmas." No explanations. No rehashing the past. Just a simple truth. We'd both grown up. That night, I placed the old photo and Adam's note on my nightstand, right next to Grandma's locket. For the first time, I felt the ties of my old life soften, not snap. There was room now for new memories, new love, and a gentler understanding of the people I'd left behind. The next day, I put on my uniform, adjusted my cap, and walked out the door, strong, steady, and exactly who I wanted to be. By the time January rolled around, the city had transformed under a layer of snow, sparkling beneath streetlights as if the whole world had been quietly reset. My team returned to full operations, the holidays a fading blur of laughter and warmth. Life in the army picked up its relentless pace. Briefings, call-outs, paperwork, late-night strategy sessions fueled by black coffee and camaraderie. But something fundamental in me had changed. I no longer felt like I was living in two separate worlds. The line between who I was in uniform and who I was at home blurred, merging into a single, confident self. When I walked into the command center, I didn't shrink or apologize for taking up space. I belonged here, fully and openly, without apology or hesitation. One icy Tuesday, I led my team on a high-risk fugitive apprehension in Baltimore. The operation was textbook perfect, fast, clean, and by the book. My squad executed with precision, and when the dust settled, the U.S. Marshals who joined us shook my hand, some with respect, some with new curiosity. Word of my testimony in Boston had traveled. I noticed the way younger officers watched me, some seeing in me a path they'd never imagined for themselves. Afterward, back at headquarters, my squad surprised me with a battered army duffel bag on my desk, wrapped in a bow and stuffed with sign cards and inside jokes. Someone had stitched a Brooks, True Northie across the side. Sergeant Ruiz clapped me on the shoulder. We figured you needed a new go bag, boss. Your old one's looking rough. And, well, the name felt right. The gift caught me off guard. I wasn't used to being the center of this kind of affection, but my thanks came easy and genuine. This is the best gear I've ever had. Thank you. All of you. Now get out before I start quoting army values or something. Laughter erupted. The bond we'd built, through danger, long nights, and even longer stretches of paperwork, felt unbreakable. These were my people. Over the following weeks, the emails and texts from my family back in Illinois became less frequent. Mom sent the occasional update about the weather or a church bake sale. Adam, now working at a law firm in Chicago, sometimes shared a joke or a snapshot of his new puppy. But there were no more questions about my career, no more backhanded compliments about making something of myself. Oddly, I didn't miss it. I felt their absence as a quiet, gentle distance, no longer a wound. When I did think of them, it was with a kind of nostalgia for what might have been, not pain over what was. Instead, I poured my energy into my team. I mentored the new recruits with patience and humor, refusing to let anyone fade into the background the way I once had. I made it a point to celebrate even the small victories, a completed training, a successful negotiation, a rookie finally nailing the radio protocol. At night, when the city lights glimmered against the frost on my apartment windows, I'd sit with a mug of tea, a novel, and the peace that comes from knowing you're living your life on your own terms. Every once in a while, I'd reread Adam's note or thumb the locket at my throat and remember how far I'd come. From the invisible niece at the Thanksgiving table to a captain, a leader, someone worthy of trust and respect. Winter turned to early spring. Our squad's reputation grew. I was asked to present at a conference for women in law enforcement and the military. Standing at the podium, looking out over a sea of young faces, I told my story, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. I spent too long thinking I needed someone else's permission to belong, EI said. But you don't. Sometimes, you have to become your own advocate. And when you do, the right people will find you and have your back. The applause was genuine, the line of women waiting afterward to talk even more so. Some wanted advice. Some just wanted to say thank you. One, a shy private from Kansas, said softly, "I never thought someone like me could do this. But you made me think maybe I can." You absolutely can, I told her. And when you do, you make it easier for the next woman. Walking back to my hotel, the city around me humming with new life, I realized that the story I told in court wasn't the end of my journey, it was just the beginning. As spring unfolded, the world seemed to come alive around me. Cherry blossoms brightened the parks near my apartment, and the city felt new again, buzzing with energy. Our squad pressed forward, another fugitive court in New Jersey, a successful hostage negotiation in Richmond, training sessions in Quantico. I saw my own story reflected in so many women and men I worked beside, people once written off, who had learned to carve their place by grit, persistence, and a stubborn refusal to give up. One Friday after roll call, Sergeant Ruiz lingered by my desk, holding a folder and looking thoughtful. "Hey, Captain, got a minute?" I nodded, setting down my mug. She hesitated. Just wanted to say thanks. Not just for taking a chance on me, but for making this whole team feel seen. Not everybody does that. Her words caught me off guard. I shrugged, smiling. You do the same for me, Ruiz. That's how teams work. She grinned. Yeah, but it's different when it comes from the boss. Thought you should know. As the squad filed out, I sat for a moment, reflecting on how far we'd come together. Once upon a time, I'd kept my head down, afraid that speaking up would draw ridicule or pity. Now, I leaned in, calling out successes, sharing lessons learned, helping even the newest recruits see their own worth. Meanwhile, my connection to my family shifted into something softer, lighter. Messages from Mom were no longer loaded with expectation. Instead, she sent recipes she thought I'd like, pictures of blooming lilacs in the backyard, the occasional update on Adam's life in Chicago. One rainy Saturday, as I was prepping gear for an upcoming field exercise, a package arrived with no return address, just my name, written in my mother's looping script. Inside was a scrapbook, old Polaroids from birthday parties and high school graduations, photos I'd forgotten even existed. Tucked at the back was a note. Jess, I know we didn't always make you feel like you belonged. That's on us, not you. I hope these memories remind you of the love that was always here, even when we couldn't say it the right way. Mom. I ran my fingers over the pages. Instead of bitterness, I felt a gentle warmth, the kind that comes when you finally accept someone's limitations and their love without needing it to be perfect. That Sunday, I called home. My mother sounded surprised, then overjoyed. We talked about nothing and everything, the way old friends do. I didn't mention the past. There was no need. We'd both let it go, or at least learn to leave it in the background. Later that month, Adam sent a photo of himself in his new office, a plaque on the wall behind him. "Look, Jess, you inspired this," he texted. Turns out, the world's bigger than the Miller family circle. Proud of you. Proud of me, too, finally. Sometimes, healing comes slowly, one tiny step at a time, through old pictures and awkward phone calls and the tentative beginnings of new traditions. As summer crept closer, I found myself embracing a life that was both hard-won and wholly my own. My identity no longer revolved around being enough for someone else. I had my team. I had my hard-earned peace. I had family, imperfect, scattered, but there in their own way. Most importantly, I had myself. And I was finally, fiercely proud of the woman I'd become. One warm night, after a long day in the field, my squad gathered for a barbecue in the park. There was music, laughter, and not a single mention of rank or protocol. Ruiz's kid raced around with a soccer ball, and someone brought a homemade cake with it to Captain Brooks, for all the right reasons written in blue icing. As dusk settled and the city lights blinked on, I looked around at the people beside me, soldiers, agents, friends, and felt a rush of gratitude. This was my life. This was my story. And I was finally ready for whatever came next. By midsummer, Washington buzzed with heat and ambition, the city pulsing with the drive of people chasing dreams, making things happen. I could feel that same energy in myself, not the restless hunger for approval that once gnawed at me, but a steady, quiet confidence. My days were still busy, morning briefings, late-night calls, the endless shuffle of case files and coffee cups, but now, I moved through them with purpose, not desperation. One Monday, our task force wrapped a month-long fugitive manhunt in Atlanta. As I signed off on the paperwork, my squad presented me with a small gift, a custom coin etched with our team's motto, "E-earned, not given." It made me laugh, but it also made me think. That phrase, more than anything, summed up what I'd built, what all of us, in our own ways, had fought for. Every step forward had been earned, every ounce of trust and respect built, not handed down. My story was mine. That weekend, we gathered at Ruiz's house for a celebratory dinner. No uniforms, no titles, just friends. I stood in the backyard, watching the grill smoke rise, listening to the chorus of voices, feeling completely at ease in a way I'd never imagined possible years before. Ruiz's wife handed me a beer. "You look happy, Jess." I grinned. "I am. I really am." We talked long into the evening, about the cases we'd closed, the ones that still haunted us, the lives we'd touched. Someone asked about my family back in Illinois. For the first time, I didn't flinch. "They're good," I said honestly. "We're not perfect, or we're finding our way." The conversation turned to the future, promotions, transfers, new assignments. I realized, with a thrill, that whatever came next, I was ready for it. There was nothing left to prove, only more to do, more to give. A few days later, I was invited to speak at a leadership summit in DC. The ballroom was packed. Soldiers, police, federal agents, young recruits. As I stepped onto the stage, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall, confident, calm, the captain and the woman, both at home in her own skin. I spoke about service, about struggle, about the long, slow process of forging a life that fits you, not someone else's expectations. I used to think value came from a diploma on the wall, or from someone else's applause, I told them. But real worth? You carry that inside you. You show it in the field. You swear to it on the stand. And if you've ever felt invisible, or like you had to fight for every scrap of respect, know this. You are not alone. And you are enough. Afterward, a line formed, young women with notebooks, Men my father's age shaking my hand, a few old colleagues from past cases. Some just wanted a photo. Some wanted advice. One woman, teary-eyed, pressed a note into my hand. Because of you, I'm applying to officer training. Thank you for not giving up. That night, as I walked through the city, the capital glowing against the velvet sky, I felt lighter than I had in years. My life wasn't simple. There were still scars, regrets, and old echoes from the past, but the peace I'd found was real and hard-earned. Back in my apartment, I took out Grandma's locket and Adam's old photo. I set them side by side, a reminder of where I'd started and how far I'd come. My phone chimed, a group text from my team, filled with memes and plans for a weekend hike. Another message from my mother, just 2 words. Love you. I smiled. That was enough. The ledger of old hurts was balanced, the need to prove myself, finally quiet. I was free. Sometimes, life doesn't turn out the way you imagined. Sometimes, it's better. Family is complicated, love is messy, but the person you become through it all, that's your true home. So if you ever find yourself on the outside, doubted, overlooked, underestimated, remember, your story isn't over. It's just beginning. The world is wider than you think, and your worth is never measured by the walls you break through or the boxes you're told to stay in. It's measured in the lives you touch, the strength you carry, and the courage it takes to choose yourself, over and over again. As for me, I'll keep walking forward, alongside the family I've chosen and the one I've made peace with. My purpose is clear. My voice is strong. And my future, finally, feels like it's truly mine.